Hello and welcome to a special feature for Reform Judaism, just ahead of our festival of Pesach, of Passover. I'm Rabbi Robyn Ashworth-Steen from Manchester Reform Synagogue, and I'm really delighted to be here with Rahima, Mahmut and Mia Hasenson-Gross for a discussion of an issue that is both profoundly troubling and close to our hearts. So we're here today to bring light to the conditions of life for millions of Uyghur Muslims of the northwest region of Xinjiang in China. Rahima, I'm delighted to be with you. Do you want to just say a few words to introduce yourself to everyone?
Thank you very much. My name is Rahima Mahmut. I am a singer, human rights activist, and project director of the World Uyghur Congress and advisor to the Interparliamentarian Alliance on China. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rahima. And Mia, do you want to introduce yourself and Renee Kassan as well?
Yeah, hi, Robyn. Thank you. My name is Mia Hasenson-Gross. I am the Executive Director of Renee Kassan, the Jewish Voice for Human Rights. We work to promote and protect human rights in the UK, drawing on our Jewish values and Jewish experience.
Great, thank you. So I think we couldn't have two better people really to help guide us through this really troubling issue. I think generally the Jewish community and the plight of the Uyghur community has been on the Jewish consciousness for quite a while now within the Jewish community, at least since July last year, when President of the Board of Deputies, Maria van der Zyl, wrote a letter to the Chinese ambassador expressing her concern. And there was a really powerful sentence within that letter when she wrote, "The world will neither forgive nor forget a genocide against the Uyghur people." I think particularly we're at this moment in our Jewish calendar that's around the festival of Pesach, of Passover. And that story is all about liberation. It's a story of an oppressed people who were in slavery and tortured by the Egyptian, the Pharaoh of the time. And it's about their escape to freedom and their hard and long escape towards freedom. And an emergence of a people as well, of a strong identity, of holding on to that identity and being able to live that out freely going into the future. So it really feels like this is a particular moment to really shine a light on what's happening and lend our support and our action to what's going on. So I wonder, Rahima, given that context, if you could maybe just tell us a little bit about what is happening with your community, what you're facing at the moment, to give us some background.
Uyghur people are Turkic Muslims, and the language is closest to the Uzbek people. And we practice Islam. The Chinese invasion, the very early invasion, was in 1759, and it dominated until 1864. During that period, later, the region was named as Xinjiang, New Frontier. But the Uyghurs don't really like the name Xinjiang. We use East Turkestan because we had two very brief independence in 1933 and 1944 before the Chinese Communist Party invaded in 1949. So when Chinese Communist Party invaded East Turkestan, the population of Han Chinese people was only 4 to 5%, and mostly the Uyghur and the other Turkic Muslims. And so the persecution of Uyghur has a long history. Many massacres happened up until this genocide started from 2017. So at the moment, we believe there are up to 3 million Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims are interned in the concentration camps. Over 500,000, this is according to the record that taken for slavery, working in the cotton fields and factories. Over 1 million children are separated, taken away to government so-called boarding schools, but it's not boarding schools, it's the children's camps. They're completely isolated from the community. So the Chinese government wanted them to become like a Han Chinese. So there has been destructions on the Uyghur cultural sites and removing any Uyghur figures, whether they are the historians, singers, musicians, poets and writers, scholars, anyone within the Uyghur community who is a kind of leader, leading role, all been taken away. So at the moment, a genocide is taking place in my region.
Thank you for sharing that, Rahima. I think it's really hard not to listen to that and to draw comparisons with the Jewish people's plight and the many years of persecution. And as you've outlined as well, the same of like massacres leading up to this moment of genocide as well. And thinking about the Exodus story that we hold, this figure of Pharaoh and of the persecution, the systemic persecution that's happening to the Uyghur people. Certainly within Judaism, I think because we've been through persecution and with the Holocaust, we stand in a particular moment in the margins and we can see what's happening and we can feel what's happening and we know we have a moral duty to act. Mia, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that moral duty that we have as Jews to make sure we support the Uyghur community as much as we can.
Sure. I think fundamentally to our Jewish conscience and to our role is that we are speakers by experience. If we go back to the story of the Israelites in Egypt coming up to Pesach and so many other events of persecution and the attempted destruction, not only of the Jewish people, but of Jewish culture, Jewish traditions, Hebrew language. So as speakers by experience, we really have the moral authority to speak out, but with it, the moral duty, like you said. Human rights, this framework that today many of us take for granted, actually, because it's the default setting for many of us, especially in the Jewish community, but not only, has an intrinsic connection to Jewish experience and Jewish values. Human rights are a legacy of the Holocaust, both because of the event, which was the peak of the most horrific human rights violations or the most horrific events of how human beings treat each other, but also of the role, because of the role of individuals, Jewish, in my eyes, I call them Jewish human rights heroes, individuals like our namesake, Monsieur René Cassin, who helped co-draft the Universal Declaration for the Human Rights, the first time the human society came together to codify some ethical principles. Individuals like Lemkin, who coined the phrase genocide, and Lantepacht, who coined the phrase crimes against humanity. And it's interesting with Lemkin, and in relation to what Rahima said, but Lemkin originally coined the phrase genocide. He gave equal measure to the cultural destruction of a people as he did to the physical destruction of a people. Sadly, international law, through the Convention for Prevention of Genocide, only gave emphasis to the latter, to the physical destruction. But we know through Jewish experience, if it's the Holocaust or previous attempts, what the role and the importance of stopping a cultural destruction of a people from happening before we reach a point where it's too late. And this is where the Jewish community comes from. And this is the role that René Cassin tries to mobilize the Jewish community in doing. And it's really that the Jewish voice of experience, the Jewish voice of knowledge, and the Jewish voice of solidarity when it's happening to others.
Yeah, and that Jewish voice from knowledge and experience is captured in our sacred text. I mean, we're told again and again, for you were strangers, you must love the stranger. And that's the story of you've been persecuted, you know what it's like, act. It's a really strong message. And we're going to get on to relatively shortly how we can help and what action we can take. But Rahima, I'd be really interested to hear from a Muslim perspective, really, on some of the background or the theology we've been talking about our moral authority and duty to act. and our story of Passover, maybe if there's anything you want to reflect on.
Yes, Passover is well written in Quran as well. There's one of the surahs that is my favorite. Every time when I listened with the translation, while reading the translation, I always had tears. It's so moving, and it's just now I really connected that, thinking, is there any way that my people could flee and to gain that liberation? But I can't see that that can happen because of nowadays this high-tech surveillance control of what is happening to Uyghurs. They cannot even walk 200 miles without being checked, have to go through the checkpoints and etc. But as people of faith, we have hope. We always told to be hopeful. Any miracle can happen. There is things that can happen. God is great and God has a power. God wouldn't allow evil to continue. So with that in mind, so Uyghur people still live in hope, even though when you look at it, 1.3 billion Chinese, and with the CCP is so powerful, and Uyghurs doesn't have military, doesn't have anything left. We are completely now enslaved, imprisoned, even at our own homes, because of this high-tech surveillance technology and other forms of control. But there is such a strong comparison, not only from this enslavement and also the birth restrictions, the birth control that is happening, especially since 2016, forced sterilization and taking men away from home so they cannot have, have children. And this is very parallel to some of the stories about the Passover, how Jews were targeted, So yeah, there's a very, very strong, even though it's such long history, we are talking about thousands of years before and now. So history repeats, but as people of faith, we believe that we must believe in hope.
That's so powerful, Rahima. I think that really picks up on the story of Pesach, is that foundational story and the promise of redemption, but it's not about shying away from the grim reality and the horror that is facing the Uyghur community as well. And hopefully, as people who are religious people, we can hold both of the hope, but also working with the world as it is. So I wonder, because of that, Mia, if you could tell us a little bit to give us the context of this grim reality that's happening. Can you give us a bit of context about what's happening in the British government at the moment around these issues so that we can educate ourselves before moving towards action we can take?
Yeah, sure. I think the good news is that there is a conversation. There is a conversation happening in government, in parliament, and British civil society. I think the disappointing side is in the willingness to take brave steps. The first and bravest step that we need to do, both morally, the UK needs to do both morally, but also under our obligations under international law, is to recognize that what's happening to the Uyghurs is genocide. So to reach a determination of genocide and do everything we can to prohibit it from happening. So at the moment, there is a to and froing between government and the House of Lords with a genocide amendment to the trade bill, which aims to ensure that the UK does not complicitly engage with countries guilty of committing genocidal acts. This is now coming to Parliament for the third time on Monday, after being voted with a landslide support in the House of Lords for 3 times. And all we're asking with this amendment is that the UK uses its domestic judicial framework, whether it's the High Court or through a suggested parliamentary judiciary committee, to reach determination of genocide, because only then can the UK, act. Now, it doesn't mean that there haven't been messages coming in from Dominic Raab and the UK government in terms of the need to have stricter regulations over supply chains and the engagement that the UK government and UK businesses have with companies that are implicitly or complicitly involved with Uyghur forced labor, either because they operate in Xinjiang region or because their supply chain uses Uyghur forced labor. And the UK was the first country to raise it in the Human Rights Council in the UN, but words are not enough. And for actions to come into play, we really need this determination, ideally through the Genocide Amendment, which is now on the table, and if not through other means, either a motion in Parliament or through the Genocide Determination Bill.
Great, thanks, Mia. And I know René Cassin has got some really helpful resources, which we'll talk about in a moment, to help us individually and in our communities make sure we can lend our voice and take action. Before we turn to that, Rahima, do you want to tell us a little bit about the support that your community needs at the moment and how we can help?
Thank you so much. I just would like to take this opportunity to thank Mia and the Jewish community. And I cannot imagine if the whole community in the world, Muslim communities, Christian communities, all the communities in the world did at least like 50%, half of what a Jewish community done during the last 1.5, almost 2 years, things could have been very different, very different. So I would like to really, from bottom of my heart, we are very, very grateful and feel strong to have a community who had such a really tragic history and now thrive in the world stage, and that gave us hope. Having you, by our side. And so first of all, I think it's the awareness raising is really, really important. I think this is very, very crucial. And also the slave labor part is very worrying. I mean, that people can do to stop it by being very aware of what to buy and the shopping habits, to try to avoid buying goods that is made, by slave labor. There are many brands, it's listed online, and people can find more information. So I would say also join the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign. And we launched Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign, and Mia and many other advisors to the World Uyghur Congress. Now they all, the chair people on this Stop Uyghur Genocide, we're leading this campaign. We have many different campaigns that people can get involved. Stop Winter 2022, we call it Genocide Game. Also Uyghur Women's Campaign. So there are many things that people can do. And we can also provide a list for anyone who willing to do more to help. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rahima. And I know we're going to include links to all of these things so that people can follow up on the campaigns that you've mentioned as well. And running alongside that, Mia, you've created for René Cassin some really helpful Pesach resources so that our Seder tables are not only filled with these stories, our foundational story of the Exodus, but they're rooted alongside the genocide that's happening in our world at this very moment. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the Pesach resources you have and some action we can take in the Jewish community as well?
Sure, of course. Rahima spoke a lot about the narrative of hardship and hope, which is the experience now and what frames the Uyghur situation and frames the Jewish story of Pesach. So we've created an action for Layla Seder, which is Make This Seder Different, where we're asking everyone to put an ethically sourced piece of cotton and green raisins on their Seder plate. Cotton to symbolize the hardship and the forced labor and the exploitation that Uyghur people are currently experiencing. And green raisins are a symbol of hope and sweetness and what could be if we take the story of Pesach and the hope that it presents to the Uyghur people. We're also launching an Uyghur Solidarity Week together with partners across the Atlantic and in Europe. So we're hosting a Solidarity Seder on the 30th of March, and all of this is available on the Renee Kassan website, where it's really taking the themes of Pesach, of broken to repair, of sleepness to awakening, slavery to freedom, silence to protest, and darkness to light. And we show the intrinsic link between the Uyghur story and the Jewish story. On the 31st of March, we're hosting an International Advocacy Day, and we will challenge each of our community members to reach out to their MPs or legislators and really call for concrete action when it comes to the Uyghurs. And the 1st of April, we'll host the International Business Day of Solidarity, where we will target businesses. In this case, we've chosen Volkswagen, that has both a Nazi era connection and a current Xinjiang 2021 connection, and really call on Volkswagen and other companies, whether it's in the garment industry, the car, technology, to really reconsider their both moral and legal obligations and their complicit behavior with China's persecution of the Uyghur people. We'll have resources available from template letters to briefing documents, so you can learn more, talking points. We have a Uyghur-specific new version for the Manishtanak questions, so to really bring an additional dimension to the whole role of Layla Seder and the Haggadah reading, which is really about reflection and commitment and legacy and the making, affecting change for better, not only for the Jewish people, but for others as well.
Great, thank you. That's so powerful. I think this Seder, we can rise from our tables into action as allies and as partners with you, Rahima, and your community as well. We're going to finish in a moment, and I'll make sure I tell people where they can find all these resources. Is there anything you'd like to just close the conversation with, Rahima, that you'd like to say?
I just would like to share my favorite verses of Surah Al-Baqarah about Passover. So here is the English translation. And remember, we delivered you from the people of Pharaoh. They set you hard tasks and punishments, slaughtered your sons and let your women folk live. Therein was a tremendous trial from your Lord. And remember, we divided the sea for you and saved you, and drowned Pharaoh's people within your very sight. And so I believe from the historically, we are all, children of God, even if we believe in a different religion, but we are people of faith. And together, I believe that we will win the battle. That I always try to give that kind of uplifting message to my people who are so desperate. And that I think maybe the best way to, best way for me to sorry. Maybe, I don't know. I should stop. I think I can carry on and on. Yeah.
That was really moving, Rahima. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it really beautifully tied together our conversation so far. Mia, is there anything you want to say before we close?
Yes, action is important, but friendship, reaching out, listening, celebrating what we have in common, which is not just our history of persecution and destruction. Food is central to both traditions. Music, we are both people with rich traditions and cultures, and I think it's always important to remember that as well. It's like Rahima said, it's balancing the hardship with the hope, and remember that both our people encompass both.
Yeah, that's so important, Mia, because it's these relationships that give us the power that we need to, one, have the endurance, but also to realize that hope and to take action. Thank you both so much for being here and your really powerful remarks now. Before we mark where people can go for these resources, I'm really minded at the moment that we're in, obviously, this extended separation from each other through the pandemic. And this Seder will be the second Seder that we're going to be doing alone in our houses, separated from our community. And there is a resource available to Reform Jewish communities about a ritual that may help you mark that. Rahima, I'm really struck by the separation that we're experiencing in a profound but relatively small way compared to the separation that you're also facing from your friends and your family. Do you want to just say a few words about that?
Well, yeah, thank you for bringing this up. I mean, I left my country in 2000. When I left, I never thought I would never go back. And over 20 years now. But at least I was able to speak to my sisters and my brothers up until 2017, January 2017. And that cut short as well. So over 4 years now, I don't know what happened to my sisters and my brothers and my friends. And especially now, for the past year during COVID lockdown. And although Chinese, the CCTV don't really show any reality within China, but they love to show the reality, what is happening, the bad news in other countries. Just imagining for my sisters and my brothers, if they are, still at home, watching the news, how many 100,000 died in the UK and not knowing, what happened to me. And because I, have cancer history, I recovered in 2013. So they always worried about my health since then. And yet they cannot even send me one text message to check how I am. This is how serious the situation is. And people talk about the mental health because of during the lockdown and all that. And I want people to also remember in their prayers, the Uyghurs, I'm just like you, more than 20 years, cannot return home to hug my sisters and my brothers. Over 4 years, I didn't hear their voice, not knowing what happened to them. I'm just one example. The majority Uyghurs living in exile in exactly same situation. So I ask people to pray for us so there's one day we can reunite with our families. At least if we can, speak to them, hear their voice, that will be like a biggest festival for me.
Thank you, Rahima. That's unimaginably painful to hear. And as you said, this is the personal loss that's being shared with so many thousands of families and held. And it helps to give a sense of the profound loss and the grief that numbers can't do it. So thank you for sharing that, and we'll certainly hold you in our prayers and your family as well, alongside taking real action as your partners and friends. Thank you both so much for being part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mia. And thank you to everyone who's been watching. As you can see, there is so much activity taking place across our communities and across the country at the moment, and across our Reformed Jewish communities. Many of us are taking action. So we'll definitely place all the links so that you can find the campaigns that Rahima spoke about and that Mia is leading on through Renee Kassan. There are 2 hashtags that you can use if you're using social media to raise awareness, as Rahima called us to action for. Hashtag Make This Seder Different and hashtag Uyghurpesach. So thank you all so much. And we're going to wish you a Chag Pesach Sameach and hopes of liberation and of hard work together as partners and friends. Take care. Bye.
Chag Sameach.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Thank you.